introduce yourself and take it away. And you've got 3/4 now.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for joining this session. So I better introduce myself properly because it's the first ever community session I've done here. So I'm going to give you some background about myself, and this will actually lead into the topic that we're going to look at today. So I'm a pre-sales engineer at iGel, so I'm doing VDI. I've been at iGel for about 4 years, and prior to that I was at Teradici for 8 and Quest vWorkspace for 5. So I've done a few different types of VDI and also things like remote workstations and things like this. So let's have a look. So my introduction, who am I? This is my oil and gas face. So I've worked in oil and gas. And when you step off the plane at Aberdeen Airport or Stavanger or Port Harcourt, you have to have this oil and gas face because you get off and there are chaps on there who are going out to the rigs and you've just got to look like them with their Pelican cases full of hardware and equipment. So I have spent time as a workshop engineer fixing Sinclair Spectrums. Yes, I'm old. I've been a field service engineer, driving around with a car, fixing people's equipment in the office and all over the place. I spent some time as a tech support engineer for a distributor, looking after Novell NetWare and Microsoft and all sorts of funky storage and stuff like that. And I did a lot of time as an IT instructor at Microsoft, so doing things like terminal services, Exchange, Microsoft MCSE. And my current role is pre-sales engineer, so I've been doing this for about 15 years. And the sort of stuff I've done in pre-sales has been virtualization, so terminal services, RDP, RDS, VMware Horizon, View, physical remote workstations, which is quite interesting, where you have cards and thin clients and zero clients, a bit of Citrix, a bit of Azure, as in NV, GPU-enabled virtual machines, Google and AWS, so all sorts of different types of virtualization and remoting. And the regions I've worked in have been quite interesting. So I have actually worked from Moscow to Cape Town and from Dublin to Dubai. So there's about 33 countries I've worked in. So this does show you some of the challenges when you get into these countries, and not everything is available. The internet isn't always there. And the industries are quite interesting as well. So I've done a lot of finance, a lot of trade floor, which is, again, high performance and interesting. Government and defense, which is challenging and interesting. Oil and gas is fascinating. They just say, yes, I would like the kit. When's it coming? They don't ask how much, it just comes, especially in the sector I was in, which is exploration and production. So you're going to places where they drill holes in the floor. Automotive and Formula One, that's interesting as well. So this was about the computer-aided design, the CX. This is production and also Formula One racing, which is quite interesting when you're traveling to places like Italy and other places in the UK where you go to see the Formula One teams and they want high-performance graphics and remoting. So they want thin clients, zero clients, and they want remote workstations for their racing. And the last one, M&E, which is just over there. It's called Soho. It's where all the media entertainment people are, and they do lots of video editing, special effects, and they need lots of remoting, whether it's in the cloud or whether it's virtual workstations or physical workstations on premise. They have high performance. So I've done a lot of high performance, but also a lot of standard VDI as well. Okay, so just to lead into this presentation, this is giving you my field experience of working in air-gapped networks of different types, different customers. The planning, the installation, the challenges, and sometimes you can't fix all the challenges. So this is what we're going to look at. It's not going to be a deep dive technical session. It's about the experiences and sometimes how you need to plan for this, what you need. I've got some items to show you which you may enjoy looking at. And you can look at these later. I'm around all day long. So I've got some props as well as presentation. So this timeline, this is the first 10 years of my life in IT. So I am old. Okay, 1984 to 1994, there was no internet. So I was a field engineer, a workshop engineer, and I was a support engineer, and there was nothing, no internet at all. There was, but we weren't allowed to use it. You know, it was DARPANet, it was military. So, yeah, we didn't have anything. The World Wide Web came about in '93 commercially, so we started to use it. And as you can see, this is a really old browser. We're using Gopher. Who's used Gopher, by the way? Anyone? Okay. Who's actually worked before the internet? Ooh, okay, some. Okay, good. Who's owned a BlackBerry 5810 or later? Yeah, okay. So we could get our emails wherever we were in the world, and sometimes we could browse. Who had an iPhone? Good. Okay. All right. Let you into a secret. I'm not a mobile phone fan. I like computers, but my first mobile phone I had was in 2005. That was because my wife was pregnant and she needed to get hold of me. So, yes, I'm pretty late to mobile phone stuff. So how did we work before the internet? So some of you put your hand up. Put your hands up again if you recognized some of these items coming up on the screen. Okay, what are those? What are those things on the left? Manuals, yeah, paper-based manuals. This is the original Dyson. I don't know if you remember the original Dyson, not the people who make the vacuum cleaners, but the people who made the floppy disks. That was Dyson. I used to carry boxes and boxes of floppy disks in the back of my car. Different versions of DOS, different versions of Windows, different versions of NetWare. Who's worked on NetWare? Yeah, okay, good. TechNet, who remembers Microsoft TechNet? Okay, right. Who's still got theirs? Yeah, good. What's this full of? It's full of DVDs, isn't it? So this is manuals and software we had to carry around with us, didn't we? Yeah, we needed big cases. I feel like a magician. Right, what else have I got in here? Oh, there it is. Who's still got floppy disks? Yeah, okay. When was the last time anyone used a floppy disk? Put your hand up, it was 5 years ago. 10? Okay, good. But yeah, we used to have to carry lots of this stuff around because we were living in air-gapped networks, weren't we? Okay. Good. All right. What's that thing in the bottom right? Who remembers having to be on site and ring your colleagues or ring your partners? Yeah? This is a typical BT Northern Telecom Meridian phone that you have to grovel to ask to get out and speak to your colleagues because you don't know how to fix something. Okay, a bit more history. This is the last history lesson. So I recently read an article where it was suggesting that terminals, as in mainframe terminals, are the beginning of EUC. Okay? I've worked on these terminals. That one in the top right is really heavy. I used to carry these up and down stairs in banks and things. They're horrible. But they were end-user computing because that's where the end user sat and they did their work, and the central stuff was in the data center on the mainframe. Okay, and then it sort of progressed into PCs with terminal emulator cards and software, IBM PCs and so forth, and now we're into the modern age of the wise wind term. And these are the latest models of thin clients that I'm typically working with, connecting to Citrix or VMware or Microsoft or others. Very interesting article. Read this later on if you can. I think I stuck it on LinkedIn a while ago, but it's very interesting about terminals and then going into thin clients because it's about the security of your systems. Okay, the evolution of networking. Again, this is a slight history lesson. Anyone recognize that thing in the top right? Anyone like to tell me what it is? Yeah, so it's an MAU, an IBM MAU for Token Ring. So I used to work on Token Ring and Ethernet. So we had physically disconnected networks. That was the norm, wasn't it? We didn't have internet. I then moved to a company where I had to administer the bulletin board, the Wildcat bulletin board, because customers would come to us and they needed files, they needed configuration, and they needed to send us messages. So they would dial into our bulletin board, and that was sort of the first internet-y type stuff, if you like. And then we got CompuServe. Who used CompuServe? Okay, good. I'm trying to remember my number. 100700777034. Okay, so yes, I don't remember it as well as I did, but there's a little button there which says internet. Yeah, this was my first experience of the internet, so you could download stuff, you could browse early websites with modems. Yeah. I tried to find a British one, like a PACE modem, but I couldn't, so I've got a US robotics modem. Okay. And then we finally get onto the internet. So, does everyone recognize ISDN? Who's used ISDN before? Okay, good. When I moved into my house that I'm in now, in 2001, there was an ISDN adapter on the side of the house. So someone's obviously been a home worker before me, and I've just carried on that tradition. So we got that ripped out, and now we've got something else. So the question is, why air-gapped networks? Okay. So these are the lessons: improve security and privacy. So we're trying to make sure the data doesn't escape or people can't see our data. Another one which is quite interesting is increased control. So with that, because you've got no one else coming in or snooping, you've got better control of your systems, apparently. Yeah, because no one else is there. You're doing the work. It may give you more work to do, but you're doing the work and you know what's happening. There's no external contractors coming in, and it's going to be more secure. And hopefully, your regulatory compliance, your planning is going to be better because you don't have to worry about the outside because you're not connected to it. Okay. And the system should be more reliable and more performant because nothing's coming in. None of those Windows updates, oh crikey, my machine's updating. None of those Zoom updates when you're just about to start joining a Zoom meeting. Who's experienced that? Yeah, it's a great excuse, isn't it? I'm late because Zoom is updating, and you cannot get round of a Zoom update, can you? It just happens. Okay, so always be 5 minutes early for a Zoom update. Okay, so yeah, it can provide you with performance, better performance and reliability because you're not connected. And there may be a cost reduction because you don't have to buy equipment to connect you to the internet or protect you from the internet. And there are different types of air-gapped networks. So I've worked in air-gapped networks where there's physical disconnect. There's nothing, there's no pipe, there's no channel going from the internet to the inside or vice versa. But sometimes you get logical air-gapped networks. Do any of your customers use logical? Put your hands up. No one, okay. So no one's using VPCs or anything like that? It's all, is anyone using physical disconnected networks here? Okay, good. It's unusual, isn't it? Most of us are working with the internet to hand, so, okay. So some of the organizations and why they do it. So they need a high level of security, and they need it because, say, for example, you're in pharma and you're building a new virus, antivirus, or antidote for some new disease that's going to come out. It's got to be protected. Okay, you've got to protect the people there. Military, government and defense I've worked in. Automotive, you cannot lose your designs. Oil and gas, you cannot share what's going on when you're looking through the floor to see where the oil and gas seams are. Media entertainment, I'm sure we've seen issues where films accidentally spill onto the internet before they're released. Okay? So that's a financial penalty to the studio because they've lost their theatrical release, they've lost us spending money on it because we're just going to stream it off some dodgy website. So these are important things. So some examples, and these are examples of where I've worked as well. So I've worked in power generation places and pharmaceutical labs, and I'll talk about the details in a minute, but anything military. So has anyone worked in defense before? Hands up. Okay. So has anyone worked in the back of a rig like this where you've got a vehicle with networking equipment running on it? Yep, like an armored personnel carrier or a command and control vehicle, or a plane, or a ship. So all these are disconnected networks just by their virtue of what they need. It could be just because of their situation or because of the security they need. And temporary deployments, when you see in the films, you see a load of tents and you see a load of big screens in there, a load of networking, this is all disconnected. I've also worked in pharmaceuticals, so I was working in a pharmaceutical place, and they just had cables and patch panels. Okay, and think of all the EMF that was in the building. There was no switches. The cables were really long. The Ethernet auto-negotiation was horrible. So nothing was going between one end and another. So we had to get them to shorten their cables. And they would not negotiate and say, let's put a switch in. No, it's got moving parts, we're not having it. So these are the sort of things you have to think about when you're working in sort of industrial environments. They have to have no fans in any device, no moving parts. It has to be as basic as possible. And sometimes they even glue the patch panels so you can't touch them. They cannot have any dust, and it's just really, it's like President Business in Lego. He just glues everything once it's fixed. That's what these customers want. I love this one about testing networks. So someone said recently, developers are dangerous. They do things no one else will. Who's a developer in the room? Is this true? Okay. Do you need to live in a sandbox? Okay, because, that's what developers are there for. They're there to build things that we are unsure of and they may break, so we have to have them. Okay, I've mentioned the video editing and special effects before, so what you tend to see in that type of industry, you get a big studio, and they will then subcontract out certain sections of the filming or the special effects or whatever to smaller companies. So if you spend your life around Soho, who's actually worked in media and entertainment in Soho? Okay, it's a very interesting industry because it's all lots of little projects are subcontracted out. So you have to make sure that your data is secure and your subcontractors' data is secure as well, because they're not always massive companies that you think. Look on the credits of any film and look at how many different companies are involved in creating the film. So I spent my time in small, cramped offices in the lofts of big buildings in Soho with horrible brown sofas where you all sit around and talk about special effects. So it's very interesting. So one thing we must think about is the preparation, and we must prepare thoroughly. And probably the most important one is your mindset of preparation, because we all think about, all the technology, the software, the hardware, we're going to be fine. So I'm going to talk about mindset preparedness, okay? And then we'll look at different things like project, timescales, travel, which is interesting. I've traveled to some interesting countries. Prerequisites, hardware, software, networks, communication options, that's the challenging one when you're on site and you're desperate to get something fixed. So when you are dealing in air-gapped networks, are you prepared for the bunker? Okay, it's bunker mentality. You're on site. You've probably gone through loads of security to get on site. You've only got a certain amount of equipment with you. You don't have your normal outlets. What are you going to do? So you have to be resilient. And I know we're engineers, so we are resilient by nature, but you have to be extra resilient. Okay? There are a lot of challenges in this type of stuff. You have to be pragmatic as well. You will have to find workarounds. You have to find workarounds. And sometimes you cannot fix every issue. You have to just leave site and sometimes have a tactical withdrawal and come back later once you've got this issue fixed in your head. And you have to negotiate as well. You cannot be black and white and say, this is how it's going to work. You have to negotiate with your customer. Just to give you an example of this, I was deploying some thin clients on a network, and the thin clients couldn't have a particular endpoint management software on them. And the customer said, well, we can't do it. I said, well, can you just whitelist it for a month or a day or whatever? So they went to the networking team. And does anyone work with networking teams? Do you recognize this? Yeah? Every time I've been to a customer, the networking team looks like that. They look at the floor, and they say, there's packets on the network, it's working. Okay? But we are all users of the network, so we must get the networking team on side, and they are the most difficult people to work with in terms of change management. So you have to negotiate. Yeah? I think that's hit a... Yeah. And you have to be patient as well. So sometimes you're on site, and there's nothing you can do. You're just stuck there, and you're just looking at your watch, thinking, crikey, when am I going to get out of here? But you have to. That gives you time to think about your next step. Because it's not always going to be bang, 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 we've done it. It's going to be 15 steps, and we're out in an hour, great. So you have to be ready for the bunker. Who actually has thought about this and thought about preparedness of your brain before you do this stuff? Anyone? Yeah, so you do have to think about this. I think it's because even though I've worked for some large companies and small companies, I've always worked in small teams, and we've always worked in challenging environments. So you have to be resilient. You have to be out there on your own with a couple of friends if you're lucky and just get it working. So my little expression is be prepared to be underprepared, but not unprepared. I'll put a copyright on there. I don't know why. I don't know if it's copyright. But what it means is you're going to be on site and there's going to be something that's going to block your project. And you won't know what it is until you get there. It doesn't matter how much you've prepared and you've got long lists of stuff, you've spoken to the customer, you've done all this stuff, there will be something that stops you. So, yeah. Okay, so with the project management and the documentation, does your project and documentation have to adhere to any type of regulatory? So, well, I've worked in finance and they have to look through your documents to make sure it's set. Who signs off on your documents? Has anyone had to do this where you've got customers signing documents off, yeah? And have you made sure that the person who you've given the documents to can actually sign them off? To make sure that these documents are actually going to be valid when you visit site. Does the change control process differ in an air-gapped system? I would say yes, okay, because you cannot think about the internet. And your project timescales are going to be completely different to a normal network. So has this been defined? Do you take into account the extra time you need when you're deploying in an air-gapped network? And like I said, I've sat on customer site and you're just twiddling your thumbs and you're looking at when's my flight home? 3 days, okay. Right, so you have to think about this stuff. And it will add cost and resources. Okay, continuing on this theme, you've got to ask your customer, will you have offline access to manuals? Will you have offline access to KB articles, community channels? Does the customer have this stuff on site? Can you call your colleague? Because you can't, as my kids say, Google it. You can't just search it up. Who remembers these things? Anyone? Yeah, this is a manual. I think I showed you one earlier on. These O'Reilly books were really great, weren't they, back in the day? Has anyone still got these gathering dust on there? Yeah, okay, good. Oh, there's a few more things in there. Good. All right, timescales. Timescales are you just have to think about this. Customer agreement on timescales to build, test, and deploy. Another interesting thing is your site access. So you have to agree with the customer when you can get on site, but also the working hours. So I've worked on site before where I was 4 time zones in front of the UK, and then they also had summer working hours, so that means I was working at 7 a.m. to 1 a.m. their time, which was 3 a.m. in my head. Okay, so you've got to think about these things. I was working in a corrugated iron shack with my head full of jet lag. So you have to be prepared for this stuff. You must get some sleep. You can't go out and go drinking and hoteling and restauranting. You've got to be prepared for this, or you just do it afterwards. So make sure that you've agreed site hours and site working hours as well, because they may just kick you out and you haven't done your project. You also need to agree what equipment's going to be there as well, because I've arrived on site to a building where I was supposed to be working in, and I went into the building, and it was empty, and all I could smell was fresh paint. And I said to the chap who was running the project, "Where's the furniture? Where's the equipment?" He said, "Oh, it's in the loft." Okay, that's good. So we spent the first part of that day, luckily he had loads of engineers, just going into the loft, downloading getting the equipment down, building the network, building the hardware, and then he finally said to me, "Oh yeah, the network's, yeah, that's not Ethernet, no, that's fiber." So I had loads of build disks. Where's they gone? Loads of build disks, and I had to reconfigure them for the right drivers for the 3Com card so I could actually connect these to a server to start deploying. So, yeah. I just hope you don't experience fresh paint smells. So this is what I'm talking about, the timescales. The timescales are completely changeable and extendable. Okay. Also, make sure you've got enough customer resources aligned to the project. Make sure there are other people going to help you out. Ask the customer. And if you're traveling, make sure you have a passport. Is it in there? Yes, it is. Okay. So these are some of my old passports, and I used to travel around the world quite extensively. So make sure, for example, you've got your business visa. Make sure you have a letter of invitation that the customer is going to allow you to do work in there. Yeah? Make sure you don't have competing visas. So when you arrive at the airport and they look at you, and you've got a visa that shouldn't be in there from a country that doesn't be friendly to the other customer or the other country, make sure you can get in. Okay? And languages as well. So I've spent a lot of time in meetings for hours and hours where English is not the first language, which is fine. You just have to sit there and you have to make sure you've got someone who actually does have the language. Okay? And the culture as well. So, yeah, I've mentioned arrival time. Make sure you're there early enough to have your car scanned, your bag scanned, your ID scanned, your equipment scanned. Does your airline allow computer equipment in the hold? So I was traveling to a southern European country with a Pelican case full of equipment. And I get to the check-in at Heathrow Airport, and the lady said, "What's that?" I said, it's computer stuff. And she said, "We don't take that in the hold." So I just had to run back to the car park, put my Pelican case in the back of my car, and just travel without this equipment. So that was my... Yeah, I just couldn't believe it. Every other airline had taken it, so yeah, you need to be very... Has anyone experienced that, where you're not allowed to take equipment in the hold? So you've all traveled on good airlines then? Yeah, excellent, all right. And also, if you're ill, like I am, I've got double man flu at the moment, as you can hear in my voice. Have you got someone else, a colleague, who is ready to take your place, who have got security clearance, for example, and all the right equipment ready to take your place to do this project, just in case you're ill and you're not able to do this? Do you work in a large enough organization to do that? So think about these things. I've mentioned site access times, and some sites, when you go on them, they ask you to do a health and safety briefing. Just because of the nature of their organization, you have to sit and do a video, so that you have to take that into consideration when you're joining site, because that takes time out of your project. Okay, so obviously when you're visiting site, you need access to resources like Active Directory, server, networking, database, and you'll need security architects. Please ask the customer first that you can access their teams when you go on site. This is something I always ask customers. How many of you do this? Do you ask that all this stuff is ready? Or do you just hope that when you get there, you can speak to the IT administrators, the AD people? Yeah. And sometimes, because we are all human, we need to take bio breaks and we need refreshment. Make sure that you have this access as well. I've had to be escorted to toilets, escorted to the restaurant. Make sure this is all built in, that you can do this. You have to ask these questions. I know they're embarrassing, but you've got to function as a human. You need refreshment. You need to relax. This picture here is just a bit of my testing. So before I visit site, I always like to test what I'm doing. And this looks a bit messy, but it was an air-gapped network. I just unplugged the network. I've got 4 screens running here on a remote workstation. I always test, if I can, the solution the customer wants in a disconnected network. How many of you have done this in disconnected, that you've actually built a test lab in your system, disconnected it, and then took it to the customer? Anyone? Okay. We need to do this because there's going to be some software or hardware that's going to go out to the internet or try to go out to the internet to do something. So it's always best to test. Yeah, it's a messy room. Okay, so hardware requirements, we need to make sure we have all of this stuff here. And like I said earlier on, so sometimes you can use virtual private clouds because that's considered air-gapped. Yep. Some of the financial institutions I work at, they allow their users to use the intranet, but they cannot go to the internet. They have to use a proxy or they have to get permission to go out to the internet and use this stuff. So yeah, how air-gapped is it? Is it physical? Is it virtual? What equipment do I need to take? This is a picture of a laptop I had to take to a customer because we were doing a proof of concept. Their security wouldn't allow us to build a virtual machine in their environment to manage thin clients. So I had to budget for a laptop, I had to put a hypervisor on it and certain components, walk it into the customer, and then I knew that that device is never coming back. Yeah, so it's always going to be in there. They're going to use it in their test lab. Has anyone had to do that before? Buy equipment, and you know it's never coming back. Yeah, so you have to budget for it. You have to ask your boss, please, can I spend X amount of whatevers on this, and the software, and the licenses? Okay. A very interesting thing which comes up is the bottom one here, which is the hardware manufacturing and supply chain. Where is this stuff coming from? Some organizations cannot take equipment from certain countries because it's manufactured in a place where they do not accept it. Okay? Just because of geopolitical rules and stuff like that. So has anyone experienced that, where they've had to buy or check the equipment and where it's coming from? Yeah. And it's not just where the product is made, but all the components that go into it and where it's going to be supplied. So we have to check the whole supply chain from the beginning. So software requirements, we need a hypervisor, we need hypervisor managers, VDI, clients, brokers, agents, virtual desktop golden image. How do we get all this stuff into the customer? If the customer doesn't have it, sorry, who remembers these things? Yeah, can you see what these are? Yeah. And how many do you actually carry around in your bags? Yeah. So sometimes you have to have all the source files on these devices and bring them in. And are these going to be coming back out of the customer or not? Is it just going to be a one-way ticket? So, yeah, I haven't used these for a few years, which is quite lucky, but yeah. Okay, they're going to work. All right. So even though you're in a secure air-gapped network, the customer still may insist on antivirus, data loss protection, endpoint management, and network access control. Yep. So they still have to have the security layered on there, even if it's physically disconnected. So make sure that these things are available as well. And with licensing as well, it's not just good taking the product in, you have to have the licenses as well. So I know that a lot of products have licenses that are based on MAC addresses. Okay, why is that going to be a challenge? Why is it going to be a challenge that if a software is based on MAC address licensing? Anyone? Yeah, can't authenticate it. Is the customer going to give me their MAC address so I can generate a license? Yeah. So sometimes we have to ask nicely and negotiate with the customer, can you send me some MAC addresses for the servers or for the thin clients that I want to deploy a license to? Do you, as a vendor or a partner, have an alternative licensing method? Do you have a trust model where you can say, oh, here's some licenses, we don't care what MAC addresses they're assigned to, just use them. So sometimes you have to change the licensing model. You may have to speak to your dev team or the dev team of the vendor to say, let's have some different licensing types, let's just get it working for the customer. We trust them, you know, they're not going to go away, they're there forever. Okay. Something else which is very challenging, and I was speaking to someone at the break about this, I consider myself a unified communications engineer. And that is because when a customer has a problem with Teams or Zoom or WebEx or any of the others, they look at the logo on the desktop of the endpoint and say, that's your problem. So I have to fix all the optimizations. I have to fix the fact that 52 people in a Teams meeting doesn't work when someone shares a document. So all of this stuff you have to look at. And it's the cross-compatibility table of versions. So, for example, is the VDA, is the client right? Is the version of Teams right? Is the broker right? All this stuff. How many of you look at compatibility charts to make sure everything's in there? Yeah. It really is a challenge, isn't it, to have all this stuff glued together, the right version of everything. Yeah. Okay. Also, once we've deployed, how do we obtain the updates and hotfixes, and how do we push them out? Does anyone remember using the really early versions of Microsoft what was it called? Not SUS? Yeah. Anyone remember that? where you could actually bring stuff in to a server and then push it out when you are ready. Not like this, oh, it's going to come down to your client and it's going to reboot automatically. So because you're offline, you have to think about, how do I get the hotfixes in? How do they go through security? And then how do I push them out? Yep. And that could be for the desktop, it could be for the servers, and it could be for the endpoints and multiple different types of operating systems. And the software security requirements as well. So when you're deploying it, again, like the hardware, I sometimes have to provide file hashes and signatures so the customer takes our software in and checks it against tampering and corruption before they deploy it. So I have to send those separately. There's the source files, customer. These are the checks and balances, customer. Okay? I used to get involved in penetration testing. The customer typically does their own because they want to. They have their own pen testing. We do, vendors do pen testing as well. And sometimes you'll have to get the vendor's security team on a call with the customer to go through remediation plans or just to explain the pen testing that has been done. So it's not just a fact of, oh yeah, it's tested, it's fine, let's go. We have to actually do some negotiations and chats and things like that. And that's an ongoing process. How many of you get involved in pen testing? Yeah. How many of you get CISOs on the call to talk to vendors and partners? Yeah. So it's a pretty common thing, and it helps the customer have trust in you that your software is going to be fine. Okay. We also, when we're talking about the validity and the provenance of the software, some people look at a software bill of materials. I would ask you to take a look at this website because it shows you how to create a software bill of materials and what it should look like. This is to trust, so the customer can trust you. This is an American website. I'm sure the UK website or the UK security people have a similar thing. Who's actually worked with an SBOM before? Okay. Just 2 people, okay, all right. Yeah, so yeah, I've done hardware bill of materials where you just list things and put MAC addresses and serial numbers, but software BOM is just as important. Okay. Networking requirements, let's go back to the engineer. Network engineer, is it copper, is it fiber? Have you got the ports open? So how many of you know these port numbers? Who's really interested in deep port numbers, yeah? Some people. 1494, anyone? Okay, 4172, PC over IP, 3389, yes, 8443, yeah, okay. And again, I've had challenges on customer site where the customer doesn't open these ports, or they only open them on TCP and not UDP. Yeah, network engineers hate UDP. So the network engineers like that, yeah, you're not using UDP, not on my networks. But that person is affecting all the users on the network. Everybody in the organization is a customer of the network team, aren't they? How many of you enjoy conversing with the network team, customers? Who's a network engineer? No one, okay. I used to do a bit of Nortel and a bit of Bay Networks in my time, but yeah, I'm not a network engineer. But yeah, they are challenging. So yes, you've got to talk about network access control, even on a disconnected network. So you may have to do things like 802.1x to get on the network. You may have to provide certificates or logins. You may have to have an operating system identifier. So I've had it where I was putting some devices on a network, and because the devices didn't have an identifier that said WISE, and they said something else, the company wouldn't allow these devices on the network. Yeah? It didn't have the right operating system ID, so we had to negotiate with the customer to put our operating system and our devices on their network until we could remediate that. Until we could put something like Forescout on there, or Cisco ICE, or any of these others. Yep, we had to get a special build, a special agent to put onto these devices to get them on the network altogether. Okay, yeah, so it's negotiation. Communication options. This is one of the countries I was working. This is our field communication station outside an airport, trying to get some software in. This was in Lagos, I think. So my colleague's there with a laptop on the top of his suitcase. And we were trying to get some software down to give to a customer for a project. So what communication is available? Ask your customer. Do not assume it's completely disconnected. They may have some positions where you can actually go onto the Wi-Fi or onto the internet. Can you use your mobile phones? I always take two. This is on EE, this is on O2. Yeah? So I've got the possibility of using different networks, because this may be great in some places, this may be great in others. Yeah? I tether these to my laptop if I'm allowed to. I've been hanging out the window of a customer just to tether this onto a laptop to download stuff and upload stuff. Yeah? I'm sure you've done this as well. Yeah. Sometimes customers allow you to do proxy, so you can actually proxy out. Have you got the pack file to allow you to do this together and take stuff out? Going back to my USB devices, this is SneakerNet, isn't it? Moving stuff around on your sneakers or your trainers. We should call it TrainerNet, but this is USB. In fact, going back into history, this is my first ever USB stick, 256 megabytes. I keep this. This has got some very valuable files on it. This has actually got my presentation on. So, yeah, these are brilliant, aren't they? If you can use them. Okay. SneakerNet, and something else I always use. Where is it? Anyone recognize this? Yeah? Where's the other one? There it is. I always take notes on a draw diagram. Sometimes you're allowed to do this, because when you go inside, sometimes you will have airport security where you cannot take your mobile phones, you cannot take any hardware. The only hardware you can take is this. Sometimes it's just that, and you've got to remember everything. Yeah, it can be very challenging working in these networks. Anyone recognize the bottom bullet point? It's a joke. Anyone? Anyone know what RFCs are? Yeah. Okay, this is Pigeon, yeah. This is about using avian carriers as a network. So you've got pigeons, you tie messages to them, and you send them off. There was a Danish user group who actually implemented this. If you're bored, look up for 1149. It's my favorite RFC. Working practices. So some of my working practices have been very professional. This on the left is a 500-user remote workstation bunker in an oil and gas organization in Northern Europe, where we had a kilometer walk between the workstation and the endpoint where the users worked with their two massive screens. You have to be very prepared for this, because if you get the cabling wrong and you get the broker wrong, you're walking a kilometer every time you need to do a change management thing. Okay? The right hand is a very disorganized working practice where I was traveling around Dubai in a taxi with a handful of dirhams trying to buy some equipment because the customer didn't have the right equipment, and we had to get it all ready and prepared. You can see it's quite a nice hotel covered in IT equipment and Pelican cases, but we had to adapt and get this stuff running. But we did in the end. And luckily, Dubai has 24-hour IT shops. Yeah. Okay. So, in conclusion, like I said, it hasn't been a deeply technical session. It's been a session about thinking about how to work in air-gapped networks. Perform thoroughly detailed discovery and qualification. Speak to your customer as many times as you want to. Just keep asking them. Agree the plans and contingencies with the customer. Not just the plans, but the plan A, B, C, D through to Z. And be aware of how much thinking you have to do. Okay, some of this just comes with experience, because you go on site and you're unprepared or you're underprepared and you think, oh, crumbs, I've forgotten all of this. Okay, I'm really old-fashioned. I make lists. I use pen and paper because it works. This never runs out of battery. This never gets through or gets stopped through a security check. You always have pen and paper. Yeah. And I would say have patience. It can be enjoyable. Just have another cup of tea, another cup of coffee on site, because you're there, you're stuck there, there's nothing you can do, you just have to wait until it's your turn to get this stuff fixed. So, does anyone enjoy working in air-gapped networks? Yeah. Okay, good. And
it makes a good change, right?
Yeah, yeah. So I hope you've enjoyed this. I hope it's given you some thoughts. I'm around all day if you want to talk air-gap. If If you want to talk travel, there was one company I went to, and we had to have a visa, which meant we had to go to an embassy in London and pay for it with a postal order from a post office. This is quite recently, and we had to have 7 inoculations and prescriptions to go to the customer for a 4-day engagement. That was really good. So you have to be prepared for this stuff. It's quite enjoyable. So yeah, have patience. It can be enjoyable, and thank you very much.